Runaway Brides Podcast, where we de-imperialize, de-colonize, culture analyze, and leave evangelical cultism at the altar. I'm Becca.
And I am Chukwu.
And today we have a bit of an interesting episode. A bit of a, I guess, maybe controversial episode. I know in today's society, a lot of American patriotism, a lot of that sort of culture is really one of like ignoring everything terrible that America the United States as a country has done in the past and currently is doing. But it's really important that we acknowledge and we sit with that reality of the horrors that the United States has committed over the course of its existence. And I had a little note here, that a little question, I guess, rhetorical question of like, what is this success of the United States without costing the lives of those it marginalizes? And kind of, in this episode, we're going to explore how we even got here in the first place. And also a random important note, we're not historians. Well, Chukwu is more than I am.
No, I'm not.
But we're not like we're not like elitists or like crazy. We're not claiming to be any more knowledgeable on this than the next person, I guess. But we both have had interest in this subject for a long time, and so we've done research and we've read, and but I think it's important also to note that like we're not claiming to be elitists and stuff on any of these topics, because I feel like sometimes that's what it comes across as to people, and I'm always one that I'm like, please don't interpret this way. so yeah, and another note I had was that that we recognize that the stuff we will be discussing today, which content warning possibly, is like, it's not going to be any news to any marginalized peoples or members of marginalized peoples that these events have affected. But at least due to my upbringing, some of this is stuff I only learned recently, and some of it is stuff that maybe the average person won't know. And so if it sounds like this is like, oh man, I already knew about this stuff. There's maybe we're just trying to get some education out there. Maybe some people didn't know. So I thought that was also important to add.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. Some of the stuff we'll touch on, I'm, Black African American, so I know some of the topics we cover, but some of the stuff is going to be specific to different marginalized people groups, so we don't. Like I said, we're not really historians. My degree was in pre-law, so yeah. So like, I'm not necessarily a historian. I just am a nerd.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
just like stuff, guys.
Yeah, we're just a couple of research weirdos. That's all. All right. Well, so today's episode is entitled "America, the Imperial: The Dark History of the United States." I'm pretty sure at this point, most people who live in America, I think, are at least aware that it's an empire. If you didn't know this, newsflash, it's an empire.
Not in the Star Wars sense of the word, but also in the Star Wars word.
Yeah, it's like yes and no. Yeah, it's yes. It's like the meme where it's just like yes, like yes.
Use a picture.
Yeah, so we're gonna like just kind of look at like a brief snapshot. Obviously, there's a lot, but a brief snapshot of how the United States and how their power and glory, um, that they a lot of times like to refer back to. Because, and forgive me in this episode, I might cough a bit because I'm a little under the weather, but just so everyone is aware. However, a lot of people, I know this particular administration and just this kind of like decade and the little bit of the previous decade in general, there's been a lot of talk of like reviving this American, kind of like this American mythological past, if that makes sense. Um, that, and a lot of people don't really know how even a sliver of that past that is accurate, because a lot of it is mythological, but you know, the parts that are accurate, they happened, mainly due to imperial behavior. Um, Lots of times we're taught that America just kind of. You ever heard like the Alex de Tocqueville? I'm probably butchering his name, but his quote where he was like, "America is good because America is great, and when America ceases to be good, it will cease to be great." Like I can't
It's
say
so
it with a straight face.
sweet.
Um, but that's how a lot of Americans think. Like a lot of Americans think, like, "Oh yeah, we were just this really benevolent group of people, and you had a couple bad apples who messed things up for everybody." Um, America just wanted to send missionaries out to everybody and spread the gospel, and it's like the history is so muddy. So the couple points we'll hit today. We're going to talk about um the indigenous community of the United States, or not United States, of North America, um, the exploitation of Africans and the labor that was used to build a lot of the foundational wealth here. Um, and also the buying and selling of land that did not belong to the Europeans to begin with. Um, and we're just going to talk a little bit about the uh, Mexican American conflict, because that's also very pertinent to the immigration problem that we're dealing with right now. Or I wouldn't even call it a problem, it's the immigration. I
The
guess I'll just say
so-called
problem.
immigration problem.
So called.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Yes, so called immigration problem that we're dealing with right now, um, which has its roots in more stuff that I'll touch on later on. We'll start with the Mexican American War. Do you want to start that, Becca, or do you want me to? How you want to go with that?
Um, well, I think you're probably the more knowledgeable one about this topic, so I will let you go ahead. And I'm actually really interested to hear some of your thoughts and info that you have because I'm not as well versed.
Okay. Sure then. So the Mexican American War is important for a couple of reasons. It was a very short war, did not last that long. Um, and frankly, in my personal opinion, the Texas quote unquote war for independence should kind of be melted in to the Mexican American War. They don't count them as the same thing. Um, but I'll give context. I'll start with the Texas, the War for Independence, or the Texas War for Independence, whatever, and then I'll lead my way to Mexican America. So, briefly speaking, what ended up happening with Texas is Mexico was allowing settlers to come into the land. At that point, Mexico consisted of the land that we call Texas now, Arizona, New Mexico, most of California, I think part of Nevada as well, and maybe Utah. It was a very large amount of land. Um, Also important to note that with that, they also had all the oil in that land, and all the resources that comes with that land that we enjoy to this day. So anyway, the United States wanted to take that land. They had their eyes on it. It was a very long term plan. Um, a lot of presidents were systemically marching their way to the Pacific coast. That was kind of always the intention, was to go from sea to shining sea. Um, so the settlers in Texas, they were Americans were basically flooding into Texas and settling it. The Mexicans were letting people in because they didn't quite have enough people to fully like populate it. So that, as always, you allow people to come in, bolster your economy, whatever. Um, However, it started to become clear to the Mexican government that the settlers were getting a little too comfortable in the land. And so the Mexicans started to close off immigration and basically started to want them to start turning in their weapons because, Americans were aggressive. Um, and there's kind of, you also got to understand, like, the Mexicans weren't unaware of what they were doing to the natives, too. Like, anyone with a brain can kind of put two and two together and be like, this is not good for us. So they were like, okay, you can stay here. We're going to limit the amount of people who are going to start coming in, and we're going to start, have people limit their weapons in Mexico if you're going to come to our country. So the United States, or not United States, the people who lived in Texas by proxy of the United States, they ended up crying bloody murder, basically saying that this was tyranny, and then basically revolted against the Mexican government. Um, Mexico then went and started a fight against the United States, or the Texans. Eventually, the Texans did win that war, and they ended up taking Texas and making it into the Republic of Texas. Texas was an independent country for a couple of years before they joined the Union. So that segues into the Mexican-American War. So Mexico was upset that they lost Texas, rightfully so. There was bad tensions between Mexico and the United States. And James K. Polk came to the presidency. Now, James K. Polk, he was an interesting president. He only served one term. He said he only wanted to serve one term. He said he had one goal, and he said his only goal was that by the end of his term, he wanted the United States to stretch from all the way to the Pacific. He wanted to achieve that in his presidency. So there was tensions on the border on the Rio Grande, and for obvious reasons. And Polk sent troops to the border and was kind of wanting an incident to take place so that they could invade Mexico and take the land. So he got what he wanted. He got what he wanted. And he sent General Winfield Scott down to Veracruz, which is where I believe the force landed, to push to Mexico City. It's also interesting to note that the Mexican-American Wars, where a lot of Civil War generals got their military experience. So Lee, I believe Grant as well. I think General Burnside from the Civil War might have also been in it. Do not quote me on that. There's a list. There's a lot of famous Civil War generals fought in the Mexican-American War. So anyway, also Winfield Scott, other history fact, he also helped come up with I believe he helped come up with the Anaconda Plan against the South in the Civil War. I might be wrong on that, but I think I'm right. But anyway, so they pushed into Mexico, pushed through Veracruz against the Mexicans, and then they ended up making their way eventually into Mexico City. That's where that song, the Marine song, like from the halls of Montezuma and the shores of Tripoli, that's where that comes from. That whole song is about the Marines marching into Mexico City, into the halls of Montezuma. So they took over Mexico effectively. However, now the reason why we do not have Mexico as a territory is because it was just too much land for us to handle. So the United States, they signed a treaty with Mexico, albeit it was a victor's treaty. So like a lot of history books will say, oh, it was a treaty, but it's like, yeah, the victors were were giving them the terms of surrender. Um, so those terms was basically give us all the land all the way to the Pacific Ocean, which is what it was. They did purchase. They made the Gadsden purchase, so they did pay for that little bit of land. But again, I mean, what choice did Mexico have? And then at that point, all that land belonged to the United States. And then Mexico was devastated from the war and then lost all of their land and resources. And so all their people basically effectively became were stuck up there. Basically, they could go back to Mexico or they could stay up there in their homes and live under American rule. Um and so now you have this when I was referring to the immigration problem, what a lot of us say in the revolutionary crowd is that immigration, people do not leave their land if they do not have to. Like Americans are leaving America, but they're only leaving America because they have to. There's usually a problem at home, and you also have to, if you're, being paying attention to dialectics, you also want to know like why is that country experiencing problems? Like what are those problems rooted in? A lot of times in our modern media will kind of act like, oh, a country just has problems, or like, and like that's just it, like that's like a character trait of that country, like, oh, that country just has problems all the time. No, they have problems for a reason. um this was Mexico's original problem. And you got to also think all of the wealth that the United States benefited, all the wealth that Rockefeller and his family benefited from when they discovered all that oil in the Texas and all those areas. If Mexico had been able to keep that land, all of that money would have gone to Mexico. Mexico is probably one of the wealthiest countries around. However, they were not allowed to have that land. It was taken from them. So a lot of immigration is basically people following where their resources were taken from. So a lot of people, a lot of people immigrate, or Mexicans immigrate to the United States because all their stuff is up here. Their money is here. Their resources are here. The same reason why the Irish, they were colonized by Britain. They ended up immigrating to Britain. It's not because they wanted to. It's because all of their resources were being shipped out of Ireland and taken to Britain. So yeah, that was a foundational point. And then the United States, then there were Native Americans who lived on that land up there too. Um and wars were fought. We'll get to the Native Americans a little bit later, but yeah, that's kind of a snapshot of the Mexican American War. Do you have anything you want to add? Anything, Becca?
No, I think that's really interesting though. I think, yeah, I think this whole manifest destiny mindset is really, it's like, I don't know. It's interesting in that it's like, man, you really think you're gonna do that, but it's also like, at what cost are you doing this? Like, it's just so baffling to me that when people are in power and they have this ability to basically do whatever, they choose to use that for basically genocide. I don't know. It just is like, it's so baffling to me that like um there's no consideration. There was zero consideration for, hey, maybe we're robbing this country of all its resources in doing this. Um and like, I don't know. It sounds really shallow, but I'm just like, I just cannot understand I don't know. I just can't understand why why it happened in the first place. Like why they couldn't be content having their little 13 colonies or whatever. It's like seems like that was plenty at the time, guys. You don't need to own the whole entire world. What do I know?
Yeah, no, your point is valid. I mean, people kind of underestimate how addicting like money and empire can be. You know, a lot of people like an empire. Um, People like being part of it. People like feeling superior. Um,
Mm.
People like war. There's some people who genuinely enjoy going to battle.
Oh yeah.
Um, and that's a whole nother conversation. Um, Private money, private corporations. Yeah, it's all the idea of it's funny, and I'll tie Christianity a little bit into this. Christianity has kind of been used as an excuse for empirical behavior because they'll say that, well, humans are sinful and their sin nature. So because of that, um, because of sin nature, it's inevitable. Like my brother has said stuff like that too. Like, well, if we didn't conquer them, someone was gonna conquer them. Um, I know. And it's like, okay, no, like humans have the ability to collectively come together to make a decision. Um, is what is the motivating factor of your society? If your motivating factor in your society, in our society, the motivating factor is profit above all else. So our actions are going to work in accordance with profit above all else. Which means you need land, you need money, you need resources, and you need people to get out the way. That's like the foundations of it. And so that happens all the time. Like if you model your society around something that isn't profit, say is modeled around people, it's going to be a different society. I mean, and people don't research societies. So a lot of people think Western societies, this capitalist society, is the only one that has ever existed. That's not true. There are other societies, especially in African countries, native islander countries, that were completely different.
Mhm.
Their societies were not. I mean, obviously they have violence and stuff like that. We're human. That's not going to change.
Mm.
But this idea of this like insatiable, um, drive and desire to just eat and consume everything you see, um, isn't really unified in all countries. Some are that way. It's very very white. It's a very
Mhm.
like Europeans have a really weird like domination complex. Now, granted, other countries did too. Japan does too. Japan has a
Yeah.
very bad superiority domination complex. But like Europeans were very interested. Like they just had this innate desire to like see something and control it.
Mhm.
I think that comes from like if you look at it from a historical perspective, like trying to understand it dialectically, you got to look at where Europeans came from, right? Europeans came from a pretty small location of land, lots of warring tribes for a really long time, really harsh weather, not a lot of resources. And so they became really good at battle, really good at military like conquest because like the best way to get resources was to take it because it wasn't abundant. Um and you had to live in really harsh conditions. So like think of that people group, that's like centuries of just the way that people group has operated. And then they go and interact with other people and they take their stuff, their way of living, and they take it everywhere else. And other countries didn't have that problem. Some countries had plenty. Some countries, Japan was very similar. Um, some countries, there are different countries who are very similar, but some were not. And so I think that's important to remember. But yeah, um, the a lot of the land, a lot of the money, the Rockefellers especially, who, by the way, are still influential to this day. A lot of people don't know that the Rockefellers are like an influential finance capital family group to this day. They are. They all we still get that money. We still get that oil, that land, the crops, everything grown on it. All of that is due to the imperial takeover of Mexico and California. California, I believe, was an independent republic as well. I have not looked into that one as much, but I believe they revolted, quote unquote, revolted against Mexico and took that land too. Which is what the bear flag represents. The bear flag republic that's why it's called the bear flag republic, because I believe there was a battle that took place and there was like one cannon in the town, and like it's like an imperial story. Like there was one cannon in the town, the Mexicans were coming, and they defended the town with one cannon, which is why I think there's like one cannon in their flag with the bear, and like there's a bear flag that they rose to like symbolize the town, and so that's basically why the California flag is that way.
Mm.
So yeah, it's very ironic to watch protests going on in LA, and it's kind of like almost beautiful in a way to see like Mexican people flying the flag in their historic land, fighting against the same empire that took it from them in the first place. So anyway, I'll digress.
Oh no, that's really interesting. I know I was just looking it up. Apparently, it was only an official, well, I say official, unrecognized independent republic for 25 days,
Oh
which is
my
pretty
gosh.
funny. It's pretty short run there. But that's an interesting point about uh, how like the protests in LA are like really similar to the well, not similar, but it's like oh, I'm forgetting the term, but it's like having this state that was previously part of this huge revolt and trying to be independent, having now protests for a different sort of independence, I guess, is kind of like a coming full circle moment. Um, so yeah, um, yeah, really interesting, really interesting stuff. I didn't know that about the bear. I saw that it was like a bear flag, but I never knew why it was a bear because I'm like it's California. I don't know how common bears are, but I guess I
They're
don't know.
very common. They're very common, actually. It's up in Northern
Because you have my
California in the
random.
forests. There's a lot of bears in Cali. But yeah, that's why. Before we segue to the next point, I did just want to briefly mention one more thing: is that um, people have a right to. It's funny. We read it in the Declaration that the people have like a right to basically rebel. The people, like a conquered people group, have a right to fight for their stuff.
Mhm.
Um, I remember seeing a lot of comments during the LA riots, and people were like, "Oh, why are they flying Mexican flags in America?" I'm like, "You are the occupying nation. I'm sorry to break it to you, but unfortunately for you, they're not all exterminated. They're still there." So technically speaking, if Mexico decided to go to war with the United States over that land again, I wouldn't be mad. Cause I mean that is their land. Um if the Native Americans want to get on your ass about their land that is theirs by treaty, let's not even get. We'll get to that later. But this theirs by treaty. Like they have a right to do that. Like Americans sometimes will act like, oh, well, you're conquered. Just stay on the ground. No, they don't have to just keep their backs bent because you want to be able to enjoy your suburban household in Costco on demand. Um, but anyway, that's all I want to say on that.
No,
Jeez.
that's a good point. It's like, yeah, it's like one point I wanted to address as we're coming up, we're going to be talking about indigenous Americans, and one point I wanted to address is this like portrayal as like, oh, they were savages, blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, yeah, of course they're going to like try to fight you because you're occupying their land. Like you're literally taking their land from them by force, so they're gonna fight back. Like that's like are you dumb? Like that seems like that's like a no-brainer. Like yeah, if someone's trying to take something from me, I'm gonna try to fight for it. So but like obviously there's another side to that. Oh, they were uneducated and savages and like um we have to civilize, but the whole portrayal of like this whole aspect of man, they were trying to get us. It's like, well, hey, you were trying to get them first. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's so stupid, that whole mindset of yeah, you can't fight back if you're conquered or if you're um colonized or whatever circumstance a people group's in. It's like you have every right to fight back. That's just part of being human and part of having rights to begin with. So yeah.
Well, I'll use that segue into our next point, which is referring to uh yeah, I debate on like honestly I kind of put it on equal footing like the slavery of Africans and the massacre of natives. I mean, it was insane. The Africans wouldn't have land to work if the natives weren't off of it. So
Mhm.
we kind of have our fates were kind of conjoined with the
Mhm.
natives, unfortunately. So yeah, I'll let you start this one off, Becca.
Cool. Well, I think not cool, but um yeah, um the I know I'm not sure even sure where to start because there's so much when it comes to how Native Americans were treated um upon the discovery of the Americas, etc. I think one point I do want to make, and one point that I have seen um well I've seen over the holidays the past few months was the concept of Thanksgiving. um whether and I'm not well versed on the actual story, how much truth there is to it, but I do know that a fact is that it is used to really downplay the relationship, the true relationship of the indigenous Americans and of the colonizers, of the English and the Europeans. Um, it's really used as a way to kind of sugarcoat, um, just kind of, well, I say sugarcoat, but like it's really used to um, almost hide the any negative or horrific aspect of colonization and just use this the but we got along for this one dinner, like so it was fine, everything was great. And the Indians taught us how to use corn, like um which is obviously not at all what happened when the Europeans colonized this land. So um, that is something I wanted to bring up, as like it's such a huge because it's a national holiday. It's something that is the story is like the story of the first Thanksgiving and of the Pilgrims sitting down with the Native Americans, and everyone's doing great, and the Native Americans are wearing feathers in their hair because that's how all Native Americans look, and this sort of stereotypical portrayal of things and a very idealized portrayal is really removing the agency and the um, blame and the guilt of the colonizers from what really was something horrific that the pilgrims and the colonizing group of people did. Like, really, it was horrific. I mean, just take the Trail of Tears, for example. Like, no one realizes how truly horrific that was, I think. And I'm gonna look up the exact number of deaths because it's insane. Um, but it's like I feel like no one, and that's just not even that's just one instance. Like, people don't realize how much death was wrought upon the Native American tribes. Like, whether it was by outright conflict, whether it was through these crazy infectious diseases that the Europeans brought because they were so good at personal hygiene and were totally able to control diseases and didn't let a plague wipe out half the continent because they were so bad at personal hygiene. That totally didn't happen. So um, it's just like no matter what the method of death was, there was so much, and um, like it was like an extermination basically. And I think, like I said, yeah, I think the seriousness of that and the tragedy and the horrific nature of that is very, very downplayed. And the Thanksgiving story is a way that is passed on, I guess, and really popularized.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. Um, yeah, the natives were. The United States practiced settler colonialism, which is colonialism where a foreign country wants to replace uh, the current population, and as if they are the native population. In order to do this, you either have to assimilate the old population, which is difficult because for resistance for one, and then also the incoming population usually is indoctrinated to have superiority complex against the old population or the current population. Um, and then you have to basically eradicate them, which the United States understood the assignment. Like Becca, you mentioned disease. Like the United States would, they have fake peace talks and then exchange blankets, and in the blankets they would have basically marinated these blankets in like with people who had diseases because they knew it would wipe them out, and then they give them to them as gifts, and then their entire tribe would basically just drop dead in a couple of nights, and then, oh, look at that, the land's free for unfortunate circumstance. um the extermination of the buffalo was another against the plains and the Indians. So a lot of people don't know about the Native American like wars. Um,
Mhm.
Obviously, natives fought fiercely for their land, and a lot of United States propaganda, really likes to make it seem as if like, oh, the Native Americans committed atrocities against the settlers. I'm like, just that sentence is so stupid. They committed atrocities against the settlers. You mean they fought the invader? Like, I'm gonna sound callous here, but I really do not care if a white woman and her child who was settling on Iroquois land ended up getting killed in the middle of the night. They should not have been settling on land that was not theirs without permission. I don't care who you are, you're a conqueror. You're a conqueror with the gall to walk on somebody else's land, build a cabin to enclose it without permission, and to then just start living there like it's yours and inviting other people to come live there and then to arm yourself. Like, if I'm a Native American, that's not a house, that's a base. I'm not gonna
Mhm.
just sit there and let you just. That's crazy. But the history books will sit there and be like, oh, well, they massacred all these women and children. It's like, you are a conqueror. What do you mean they massacred? You should not have been there in the first place. And half of the time, they would tell them. They'd be like, hey, get out. They would try to have talks, but it's like they would sit there and make treaties that they would break all the time. The United States has
Mhm.
so many broken treaties that have
Not
like
even funny.
there's one that was made, I believe, with the Lakota tribe. I might be off. But I think it was the Lakota tribe, and it basically said that they could keep their land. Just the fact that they're even negotiating for this land is ridiculous in the first place. But they said that they could keep their land, but there was a clause in it that the natives didn't notice that basically said they would be allowed to keep the large pockets of their land up where the Dakotas are located, um, so long as there was enough buffalo in the area, to basically make it like feasible for them to live there. Now, this loophole allowed for the United States to systematically kill all the buffalo, so there wasn't enough buffalo for them to live there. And then they all of a sudden showed up to the tribe. It was like, hey, due to the terms of the treaty, there's not enough buffalo in the area, so you're going to have to go on this reservation. Um, the United States, and civilian, and I also want to highlight civilian participation. I say United States, and it can make it sound like it was just the government. The civilian population enthusiastically participated in this extermination, Christian and non-Christian alike. Uh, we like, people like to make it seem as if they weren't. The government had bounties that they would pay for people to hunt Native Americans like animals and bring their scalps into government offices. The government office would count the scalps and pay a certain amount of money for the native scalp in order to clear the land out, as if they were clearing weeds in a garden. Civilians would shoot buffalo for sport and just leave them out to die, so that way that the Native Americans wouldn't have, or the indigenous Americans wouldn't have any buffalo to live off of. They were killing three, at one point, they were killing 3,000 buffalo per day. Per day. That is insane. 3K daily. There's that old image of the guy standing on the massive mountain of buffalo skulls. That's a real picture. Those are
Mhm.
all those buffalo just in that area that they killed. They starved these people. They used biological warfare. They used psychological warfare. Um, they would do everything under the sun. They put them in reservations, which a lot of people don't even know, like, the quality of life in these reservations. They were concentration camps. Those people were
Mhm.
starving. They had to rely on rations from the United States, which they wouldn't hardly ever meet. They got their clothes from the US. They couldn't, some reservations have restrictions on their cultural practices, um and wouldn't allow them to practice their culture because they were trying to eradicate it. And also they felt, people are like more likely to have resistance, mentality whenever they can gather together, talk about their ancient stories, remember who their people are. Kind of like, Moana, when she's like, remember who you are, like, when people can do that, they get motivated. You don't want that if you're the conquering country, so you get rid of it. um So then that's also why a lot of boarding schools happen in the United States as well. Um, Along with the Dawes Act, which was passed to allow basically Native American fathers to basically bring their family into American society and to like send their kids to American school. I believe one of the I can't quite remember his name, but he was a government official. I believe he worked in the Department of Indian Affairs right around when we started to take the Lakota's land, or right around when the Dawes Act was enacted. And he mentioned uh basically kill the Indian in him and save the man. That was the mentality. Like basically colonize to the fullest, make them forget their cultural clothes, cultural teachings, cultural everything, eradicate their language, and assimilate them into our country and let them be part of the minority labor force. So they can go work on the railroads with the rest of the unfortunate minorities. Um, Thanksgiving, I wanted to touch on that too. Historic. So again, we're fed a mythology. Like people do not realize how much they're being lied to by this country. It is bad. Thanksgiving. So there were multiple Thanksgivings. Thanksgivings were Thanksgivings were declared as a celebration, basically for a lot of Native American massacres. So it was like a victory feast. Um, so what ended up happening on Thanksgiving, there was a so for indigenous people, Thanksgiving is known as a day of mourning. It's not a celebration day. It's a day of mourning because they were basically reflect on the fact that their land was invaded and their peoples were genocided and then their cultures were taken. Meanwhile, the United States citizens, again, grown people never research it. And granted, people are taught in school this stuff on a mass scale. So like kids aren't gonna assume the history book is wrong. Um, but I digress. So in the first Thanksgiving was declared in 1637 by Governor Winthrop of Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they celebrated the massacre of over 700 Pequot. I can't know if I'm saying that right, but Pequot or Pequot men, women, and children. So it was a celebration over a Native American massacre, is what the Thanksgiving feast was. The Thanksgiving feast that a lot of like historically that we're taught about was the first meeting they had, and it was a feast talking about a land treaty agreement, and they had like a meal over that. That's kind of the celebration they're talking about, but it wasn't like this good faith goodwill event of we've all been working together for over the year. Oh, come on over, let's have a great meal. No, and again, Christians will use this event to make it seem as if they're like these wonderful benefactors who just love all people of all different cultures. These people were predatory vultures. They intended 100% to take this land. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
gotta think of these people as scouts. Like, you ever seen that scene in Lord of the Rings whenever Legolas in Helm's Deep kills the warg rider and slits his throat, and he shouts back and he goes, "A scout!" And then everyone starts riding to the front to meet the wargs and send the women and children to Helm's Deep. That's who these people were. They were the scouts. They investigate the land. They analyze the people. They check what they're how technologically advanced they are, and then when the time is right, they do what they gotta do to take the land. Because it's always
Mm-hmm.
about the land. Um. So yeah, I mean that's a small snapshot. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different, more narrow um topics that can be talked about. There's I'm sure we'll do an episode on land back, which I think is a really beautiful concept.
Mm-hmm.
Um But again, I also want to digress. Like, conquer colonized peoples have a right to be upset. Like, those
Mhm.
people are still there. Those nations are still there. Like, Americans are, very arrogant people. They will sit there and act like that a country is just supposed to sit there and shut up and just be a good little conquered, a good little conquered country and just sit there. No, they don't have to. They have every right to be as loud as they want to be. And if you are one of those Americans that sits there and takes pride in this history because you want to be like, oh, well, they fought each other. Yeah, but the context. Come on, guys. The United States has killed more people than literally. If you took the amount of people that every other empire has killed, from Rome to Mongolia to the Persians, those are like the big empires. If you take all the people, the Inca Empire, all those empires, and you combined them, they still have not killed as many people as the United States have. United States has, including the natives, Africans, um, African Americans after they had been here for a while, overseas colonization, and that's just direct military combat. There are so many other people they've killed through indirect means, starvation, disease. I mean, it's there's so it, it's so much. It's so much. Like in Haiti, the original people who lived in Haiti, the Taino people, they're gone. There are no Tainos left. There's no one who can trace their. As far as I'm concerned, I might be wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, there are no more Taino. The French, Columbus landed in Hispaniola or Haiti, which is the Taino name for it. They basically enslaved the population. They all died. And then they brought Africans there to work the population. And, bless my heritage, they overthrew the French. And then they named the island Haiti in honor of the Taino people who had all been who were all dead at that point. It's very sad. Um, but yeah. Uh, yeah. So again, the United States gets its power, influence, and money again from all this land that they took. And the natives didn't use the land for the same way. Like a lot of these gold rushes took place. The natives knew a lot where a lot of this gold was. Like, but they didn't have the same cultural value on. That's what I'm saying. Humanity can choose how it interacts with resources. Like these resources don't necessarily have an inherent value, if that makes sense. Like they do in terms of scarcity, but we choose to apply that scarcity value on these things, right? Like they were doing business with seashells. They knew where the gold was, but like it's gold. It's a stone. It's a pretty rock. There wasn't this raping of the land to take every little thing out of it. Um, that's a very uniquely capitalist economic system method. Um, last thing I'll say on this, I advise people to look at like land back initiatives where some natives have gotten their land back. It's awesome. A lot of it, like the first thing they do is basically like give the land rest, and they're like taking factories out, they're restoring
Mhm.
the water, fixing the fish, and it's like, man, I love that. I wish we all could do that right now.
Right.
But yeah.
I've often had the thought that, like, I wish another COVID this sounds weird, but I wish another COVID would happen because I remember at the time, like, when in the first few months of quarantine, the amount of, like, healing the environment was doing was tracked by environmentalists, and it was crazy. There was so much, like, not having cars always on the road and not having factories doing as much work and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's a lot of pollution is caused by these giant corporations, as we all know. But there was so much healing that was happening in the land, and it just kind of got all undone again by the time COVID, like the quarantine ended and stuff like that. But yeah, it's like the giving natives the access and the right to their own land that they have the right to begin with is so much better for everyone involved, because it's like, yeah, first of all, this is their fucking land to begin with, so like, why would you not give it, literally be like, here, whatever. But that's a whole other point. But then also, like you said, it's good for the land itself. Like, they're repairing it, they're taking out these like parasitic factories, and making sure the wildlife is taken care of, and making sure that all these like all the native peoples are able to even live and thrive on it. And so yeah, I strongly concur. I think I encourage everyone to look into land back initiatives, because that's something I really am passionate about as well. I saw a video, and I forget the person who made it, but it was a native person. They were talking about how the whole point of land back, it sounds to most people like land back is the natives taking back the land and pushing everyone out. But that's a colonizer mindset. That's a settler colonialism mindset. The whole point of land back is not to kick everyone out and stuff, because that's not feasible anyway, just because there's such a huge population in the United States anyway. The whole point is to give it back and give access back to those who know it best and who have lived here for longer than any of the settler peoples, like the colonizer peoples. And it's to give them the rights to have says in what is done with the land, what is built, what is not built, etc. In order to take better care of it for the environment and for everyone. Because as most of you have probably noticed, if you can't tell, this winter has been, I mean, specifically where I live, Chukwu, I know you live in a warmer state, but I'm in Colorado, and this winter has been mild, to say the least. It has been, I think I can only think of a few days where it has been below 30, and that's very highly unusual. So having an environment that's literally dying, the ozone layer is dying, like you can feel how warm and how unstable it's getting. And I think to give the rights of land back to those who were on it from the get is so important, because they have the knowledge and the ability and the right to say, no, you can't do this. Yes, we should do this. Like, this is what's helpful. This is what's not. So I think at the end of the day, land back is such an important movement, and I fully support it. I think, and I think going back to the immigration thing, another thing that I really support is that, like the whole immigration problem or whatever, these illegals, is stupid, because the land's stolen to begin with, and you can't be illegal if you're on stolen land. So I think that's also important. And one thing I do want to touch on with the whole boarding schools thing, I am a linguistics major, and I've studied this a good bit, and I've studied Native American languages. Like, I'm not well versed in any one, but I've studied how they work, and the amount of culture that is in language to begin with is insane. But with Native American languages, they are so, I mean, there's a reason in World War II, Navajo was used in order to like confuse German spies, and like as it was used as a code language, because it's so incompatible with pretty much any other language. A lot of Native American languages are so, like, they function so fundamentally differently from a lot of world languages. And there are language universals, which, if you're a linguist, you'll know what I'm talking about. But they're like just at the base level, there's so much semantic weight carried in each word in Native American languages that and that's why there are you see like really long names for things. For example, like very descriptive names. Because there's so much weight carried in these languages that it ends up being, if you translate it to English, something that's either long or very descriptive or seems overly descriptive. And this erasure of culture that happened in these boarding schools, it's not that, it wasn't that they were just, the kids who were put in these schools were just like forced to learn English in addition to their own language. They were forced to unlearn their native languages and only speak English, and they were punished severely if they spoke anything else. And that erasure of culture is more tragic than I think a lot of people realize, because a lot of culture is carried in language, and especially with Native American culture. And so that's something, as a linguist, I'm really passionate about, and I think I wanted to highlight, just because, yeah, it's just so sad, so incredibly sad, and I it's also, yeah, it's not something I see talked about a lot. The whole the boarding schools and how Native American children were basically kidnapped, basically, well, not basically, they were forced to go to these schools and forced to unlearn their culture and assimilate. And yeah, I don't see that talked about a lot, I think. So yeah, that's something I wanted to highlight as well. And speaking, well, speaking, on the subject of, I guess, Native Americans and their treatment and their being pushed out of their own land, this led to, um, because the Native Americans were being killed basically by the millions. I think the estimated death toll was almost 100 million over the course of the 1600s and 17th century. This led to the Europeans being like, well, now we don't have anyone to do labor for us. Let's just kidnap and enslave the whole continent of Africa, pretty much. And so that's what they did. And I think with this topic, I'll let Chukwu take it away, because that's something I think. Well, I think I have a lot to say on it, but I think Chukwu, I think you probably have more.
Yeah. 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 So we've touched, I think, on a previous episode on the transatlantic slave trade a little bit. Um, it's important to note. So Portugal started it. A lot of people are not aware Portugal started it. And originally, the slaves were taken to the islands in the Caribbean. Also to Brazil, to work there. Mainly because the Inca population was not. I'm not quite sure why, but I know for a fact that their people were not sturdy enough to withstand the torture. Um, Africans were tough people. We're like the dwarves of, Lord of the Rings reference. We're like the dwarves of the world. So we can work anywhere apparently. So they shipped us over there, and because Portugal did settler colonialism with the Incas, and we were the mode of production. Marx says that the that basically Africans were the first capital, um, and also that the Europe turned Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. And so that's exactly what happened. The Africans were kidnapped and shipped off. Now, a lot of people a lot of people do not know that African resistance was very fierce. It was expensive to run these slave ports, and a lot of people like to try to make it seem as if the reason why slavery was abolished was because of good-natured white Christians. That's not the case. It was expensive as hell. Because if you've got African people raiding, like, I would suggest anyone who really wants to know what was going on to listen to Professor John Henry Clark. He's an African studies professor. Um, I think he's passed now, but he's one of a really, really big black figure. Um, he really goes into detail and shows like what he has a particular lecture where he's talking about what was going on in all parts of the world. You have, the people in Ghana are revolting and like fighting back viciously. There's actually a queen who like resisted occupation for ages. I believe she won eventually. Lost an eye in the battle. There's like a statue to this day of her like standing on the throat of a European colonizer. It's a beautiful statue. Ethiopia. I don't think Ethiopia was ever conquered.
No, they weren't.
They tried. Yeah,
That's funny.
Ethiopia
No.
never fell. They couldn't take Ethiopia. The Zulu were fighting. Like everyone was fighting. The people were like slave ship rebellions happen a lot more often than Europeans like to talk about. In fact, Europeans, a lot of French and Spanish and English and Portuguese enslavers, whenever a rebellion would happen, sometimes they wouldn't document it because they didn't want their superiors to know what was going on back home. And they also didn't want enslaved populations to hear about it and get motivated. So a lot of documents have been destroyed. And so Ghana, a lot of countries were basically, a lot of Africans all over the world were fighting at once. You had Africans in the Caribbean also fighting. The ones that were in the Caribbean mostly came from the area of Ghana, which was a kingdom, um, or had been a kingdom. So they had a reputation for being very fierce. A lot of slave revolts and rebellions were from Africans descended from Ghana. Um, and a lot of Africans never really forgot that they were African. They would always, remember their people and fight. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to clear that up before I went into it because a lot of people have this. Europe likes to paint this mentality that African people are just this like weak, meek little body of people that just ushered into slavery and just needed the white person to come and save them. No, like that's not what happened. Anyway, the slavery was needed as a mode of production to advance. It was the mode of production. It wasn't needed. I won't say it was needed. It was the mode of production that Europe has selected for itself because they were colonizing these lands and they did not have enough people or they did. However, they just did not want to use their people to go work in these harsh, terrains. And they wanted to make money. So before there were factories, there were slaves. Factories, as we all know, allow people to make a large quantity of product very cheaply for a high profit and a high yield at a high rate. Slavery was the same way. They were the factories before factories. They were they worked large quantity of items. I believe Haiti was producing like 60% of France's I think it was sugar. I don't quite remember the crop. But like just Haiti like the amount of money that was coming out of these places was insane. Um, so in order to establish slavery, you need to set up a. Not only do you need the your population to buy in, and that's where you get a lot of the just absolutely some of the most bogus, theories that quote unquote scientists would come up with for like, oh, why black people are dumber than white people, or black people are this, or black people can't coexist with white people, or they need guidance, or they're savages. They'll use like the Christianity thing. Oh, they're pagan, so because they're pagan, that means that they can't advance as a society. And never mind that when the Spanish went to the Mayans, they didn't know how they built their places because they said that the stone was so precisely cut and fit together, they couldn't stick their swords between them, and they just could not figure out how they built them. But I digress. Or the pyramids, they still don't know how they were made. No, they were not made by the Jews. As much as people like to say that, that did not happen.
No,
There's
they
no
weren't
proof
made
that they
by
were
slaves
ever slaves.
either.
Nope, 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 nope. But
Believe
again,
it
we'll
or
get to
not,
that in the
believe it
episode.
or not, colonizing peoples, slaves do not have to exist in order for things to be built and for things to be cool and that are built and for production to happen. You don't have
Thank
to enslave
you.
people in order to make great things. Like, sorry guys,
I know, newsflash,
myth
right? Like
busted.
they do. They act like in order for any great monument to happen, they're like, well, they didn't have slaves. It's like this couldn't have been them. Um,
I've been aliens.
just oh my god, I don't get me started on the ancient astronaut theorists suggest. It's so stupid. Um, so yeah, a lot of racist theories, came up to justify white superiority. Um, a lot of segregation laws and Jim Crow laws were based on this as well. Um, and black people weren't the only ones who had this. There was like racist thought, science, quote unquote, related to every single culture. In fact, one of the reasons why the United States was bombed by Pearl Harbor so easily is because there was a scientific study that was sent out. I can't remember if it was by the military or by just a study that was done that basically said the Japanese basically couldn't fly planes because their eyes were too thin, and they just weren't capable, and they didn't have the intelligence necessary to fly planes. Meanwhile, Japan developed a torpedo bomber just for the United States. It was a torpedo bomber that they developed specifically for the torpedo to fly to go through shallow water because there weren't torpedoes that could do that. And they needed to bomb the ships properly. So they spent a couple months, developed a torpedo that could be dropped at a very difficult angle. It had to be a very specific piloting angle and dropped in a very specific way for it to travel in shallow water and sink the ship. And they did that. And literally, the Americans refused to even consider the idea that Japan would, invade. They're like, oh, the Japs can't fly. The Japs wouldn't do that. Well, they did, and they whooped ass that day.
I
Uh,
don't think I don't think I'd ever say Pearl Harbor was justified.
literally, like it
Don't
was.
take context, guys,
Oh
please.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
funny
Yes,
though.
no, I'm not saying. I'm not necessarily saying to. Yes, those were two imperial powers fighting each other, so they were both
Yeah,
wrong.
so, like
Uh,
right, but that's
However,
objectively
it is
really funny.
ironic. It is, yeah, it's ironically
There's
hilarious.
some pop culture reference that can be made, I think, with that, like, "Oh, they'll never do this, they're not intelligent enough," does the thing and does it better than anyone expected.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Um. So yeah, they established system of systemic racism. Because and when we say systemic racism, a lot of people don't know what that term actually like means. It basically means that the country's like very like DNA is racist. And when I say racist, I mean like colonial. It
Mhm.
was their economic system was is capitalism is born of slavery and colonialism.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
just because so that's why like for instance like the prison system, right? During COVID, a lot of people don't know that a lot of the hand sanitizers you guys got, they were made for free in prisons. Companies contract I worked in the prison. Companies contract with prisons to have the prisons make a lot of products for basically free. That's
Mhm.
why in the amendment it says accepting the amendment that abolished slavery. It says accepting cases of I believe it's accepting cases of like prison for which the party will be have been duly convicted or whatever. So that's why they can pay them nothing, and it's not a coincidence that the majority of people in the prison system are minorities, and that's a whole other topic to get into. But they started to be like, and they started on this very early. They started to arrest black people on trumped up charges. They were called the chain gangs, which is it's because they would be a large group of black people with chains on their legs on a line, and they would go basically do all the stuff they did on the plantation, but this time in prison clothes. So they're still picking cotton, still doing all the stuff. Like people don't know there's like sharecropping, where basically it's like a very old feudalistic system. They get very, very, very little, if any, pay. Sometimes the pay is just a spot to sleep and eat, and then they like work the land. It's just basically slavery with
Mhm.
extra steps. Um, and this is how the country sustained itself. So again, these systems are still in place, and there's a lot of them. Like Jim Crow was for years. It was in the government system. So like the Ku Klux Klan had millions of members throughout the United States. These people were in office. They were in the police. They were everywhere. Like this doesn't just go away because they sign, a civil rights bill, which clearly they can take away whenever they want to.
Mhm.
Um, so this the amount of money the United States made, um, off of the free labor of African people. Like when African people talk about reparations, that's what they're asking for. They basically want the United States as a entity to basically pay restitution for the not only like the evils done, but also for the labor extracted from the African people as a whole, which probably
Mhm.
would never happen until like Africa, either unites itself or African Americans in the U.S. also, um, form a national bloc or something like that and demand it. Um, but that's what reparations are for. A lot of
Mhm.
people have this weird misconception with reparations, or like they shouldn't have to, which is funny. I think I've mentioned this, Becca, but like I always say, a country has a responsibility to pay reparations as long as the people offended, their people group as a block, are still alive. Like for instance,
Mhm.
I said before, like if like Rome can't pay reparations because Rome doesn't exist. Rome can't
Mhm.
pay reparations to the Celtic government, um, because the Celtic government is no longer there. And the systems are no longer there, and Rome is no longer there. However, like I always say, if there are people to be paid, and there is a person to do the paying, and the societies are still present, then reparations need to be paid. The U.S. is still
Mhm.
here and benefiting from all of that free labor. And the descendants of those slaves are still in here suffering very, very badly. And the people in Africa who the United States has colonized, because we're not even going overseas, but they're suffering too and are actively being repressed and colonized. So, yeah. Um, but yeah, the United States, like again, the empire extended even up until there, and African Americans in the United States and all over the world have put up great resistance and have flourished in spite of attempts to the contrary. Um, but the United States wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that slavery. I think Marx is the one who said that the wage slavery uh, that the Europeans experienced in the factories in Europe and the United States relied upon slavery pure and simple in the New World. If they didn't have all of those free resources coming in to those factories and into those industries, then they wouldn't have had any money, and then they wouldn't have had a population size. Europe would have been riddled with war. The only reason why they had all these resources was because frickin' Spain went to the Incas, took all their gold, smelt it into tons of gold, and shipped it back to Spain. Spain had so much gold that their economy crashed. I don't know how many people know about that, but look that up. Spain, they had so much gold that the value of gold in Spain became worthless and their economy crashed. That's why England overtook Spain. That and the fact that their armada got destroyed in a battle. Um, but England overtook Spain in terms of a global power because Spain was rich, but it got too rich because it took so much damn gold from Africa and South America and the Aztecs that it destroyed their country's economy. Um, but anyway, I digress.
Yeah, no, those are really good points, and I didn't know that about Spain. That's really, I mean, yeah, if your economy crashes because you stole too much gold, like that's kind of on you, honestly. I don't know. That's kind of funny, but at the same time, yeah, that's really morbid that they exploited so many peoples in so many different places that um it led to such an overabundance of resources and of valuables. So that's yeah. Um, I think one thing I wanted to touch on with systemic racism is that because because people think America or the United States is like equal opportunity, land of the free. Everyone can do whatever you want. You just got to work hard for it, but you can do it. But I think what people don't understand is that in order for African Americans to get rights in the first place, there had to have been an amendment to the Constitution. And then there had to be the Civil Rights Act. It was like a two-part deal in order to even legally give an entire group of people rights. And if my argument, I guess, would be if this is truly an all men are created equal scenario, why then would um there have to be amendments in order to give rights to people? Why would there have to be amendments to eliminate slavery and to ensure rights to African Americans if the government was truly equal opportunity to begin with? And obviously with the amendments that doesn't change anything, not overnight anyway. And so, and especially without reparations, like the white slave owners were given reparations. What about the slaves? What about the people who were enslaved and who were tortured and who were treated like property for years and years? But why didn't they receive anything as a hey, sorry, for fucking torturing you and kidnapping you from your homeland and enslaving you and forcing you to do unpaid labor. Um why were there no reparations for that? Why can we not give them reparations now? Give reparations to African Americans, who may be, I think I've mentioned this before, like 2 generations away from slavery, 3 generations away. So not that long ago. Civil Rights Act happened, in some people's lifetimes. And on the topic of reparations, without the compensation for this horrific practice of slavery, an entire group of people had to build their lives from the ground up in a system of government, in a country that was not built for their success to begin with, or built for their livelihood outside of being enslaved. And it's ridiculous that people think that systemic racism doesn't exist, because it's like, it so clearly is ingrained in this country, because the country was set up only with the rights of white people in mind. And I can go as far as to say white men in mind. And all men are created equal really didn't mean every single person. It meant whether you're from England or if you're not from England. It wasn't I don't think, anyway, it was a phrase used to be like, everyone on the planet is equal, because we're all human beings, which seems kind of common sense. No, it wasn't explicit, but it excluded African Americans, it excluded Native Americans, it excluded basically every other culture except for the white colonizer European culture. And it, with that, with the system of government, with the country being set up in that way, obviously it is not going to favor people of color or people of different cultures, or those that it enslaved to begin with, or those that it exterminated, such as the Native Americans. So no, it is not an equal opportunity country. That's why DEI, for a topical, I guess, reference. That's why diversity, equity, inclusion is so important, because there is not equal opportunity, truly. I know my parents, well, my mom in particular, would use Oprah as an example of, see, black people can be successful because Oprah is a millionaire. And it's like, well, well, no, just because there is one person of color who was successful and has a lot of money or whatever, that is not the rule. That is an exception to the rule. There, like I said, the entire in like African community of people who were enslaved, the black community, were forced to, from the ground up, exist in a society that wasn't made for them in the first place, wasn't made for them, their success or their livelihood, or their individuality, or I don't know what other words I can use there, but the whole system wasn't set up for Africans in the first place, African Americans. So no, it's not going to be systemic racism is not going to be something that doesn't exist, or that is fixed overnight, or that goes away with time, because of the Civil Rights Act was 60 years ago already. Yeah, but there's people still alive that were affected by that. So yeah. And I've noticed a lot of people comparing ICE nowadays to slave catchers. And it's like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. But also, police were, the entire police system was founded basically to be slave catchers. Like that was the entire reason that the police was established in the first place. So it's like, yeah, we know we know ICE is acting like slave catchers, because that's the police. That's literally the police force. So, and that was their original purpose, and it is at least part of, well, not even part, is a large part of how it functions in the first place and to this day. So, yep. I have a lot of thoughts on systemic racism, but yeah, I will. we're getting to be starting to get to be a lengthy episode, so um I will stop there. And plus, we've got many more episode ideas, and we've even got some on like colonization, the different types, and like we're gonna examine some different examples, I guess, around the world, and like why I guess the United States is so not unique, but why it is so uniquely harmful um, as a colonizer and an imperial state. So, yeah, Chukwu, any other thoughts?
Not much really. I'm gonna save a lot of it for some other episodes too. Like DEI, I definitely have some words about because it definitely was not nearly as effective as a lot of people thought. Um, you know, obviously there's a lot of race, African American stuff I'm sure we're gonna touch on too, in the future. I think the only thing I'll say is the US, all of the Western powers, I just don't want to let them off the leash because
Mhm.
they were just as bad, if not worse. And I'm not saying you're saying they're not.
Mhm.
I'm teaching a unit at the school I teach at, and we're talking about Britain. Um,
Ugh. Yeah, Britain was
and
uniquely, but Britain was really, really bad too.
Britain was insane. Like all these I won't go into it but my goodness, these countries: Spain, Portugal, Britain, France. France likes to
Ugh.
act like it is the sophisticated big sister of Europe. France
Mm.
is a vicious place. Those
Mhm.
people were vicious. All of them were
Mhm.
vicious. I mean, cruel beyond all understanding. And and every culture of people has the capacity to be cruel because we are humans. We're products of our environment. Depending on where you grow up, I'll determine how you are. Um, but yeah, we definitely have a lot of different topics to cover.
Mhm.
Hopefully, I'm hoping what we cover for, you, the audience, just kind of shows just like again, this is a very bird's eye view of American imperialist actions. We could literally pick like hyper specific topics in like all three categories and
Mhm.
probably have just as long, if not longer, episodes about them because it's
Mhm.
a lot.
Yeah,
So if
and
we
I think
didn't
that's
cover everything,
how.
go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say I think that's kind of how we're gonna do a lot of episodes, unless either of us wants to do something really specific. I think that's kind of how we've been filling it out, like doing a more of a bird's eye view on things.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's more palatable, not palatable, but it's yeah, I guess it's more palatable for the average person. And there's a lot of stuff that we want to touch on, and having a broader view, we can touch on different things without getting into crazy detail.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we didn't cover everything, like I said, just feel free to send us any kind of emails or messages. Email I believe is Runaway Brides Pod at gmail.com, or is it the Runaway? Is it just Runaway?
I think it's just Runaway Brides Pod at gmail.com.
Yep. And our Instagram is, I should have this unlocked at this point, but I do not. Let me find what our name is on Insta.
It is
On
Runaway.
Inst,
Okay. Instagram
go
is
ahead.
Runaway Brides Podcast. It looks like.
Yep. Runaway Brides Podcast, all lowercase, and um, yeah, you should be able to find this on should be up on Spotify, Apple Music, and anywhere you get podcasts, basically. I
And we will
before we
also be on
close out, I
YouTube.
YouTube. That is true. Yes, YouTube. Our YouTube handle as well is the Runaway Brides Podcast. That's the only one that has the in it, so it should be the Runaway Brides Podcast, and you should be able to pull us up there as well. I also wanted to, before we close out, give some like recommendations for people, for resources. I know for me, again, I mentioned that John Henry Clark. He's a really good historian, African American historian. Um, in terms of also, I believe we've mentioned him here before, but Alex O'Connor on YouTube is fantastic. Um, Genetically Modified Skeptic, I want to also recommend as well on YouTube. Um, and uh, also Second Thought on YouTube. He's a socialist. He does a really good breakdown of different societal topics from a socialist perspective as well. So I would like to advise people to do that and get involved in any organizations too. If you have any like local FRSO, PSL, um, DSA, I have some thoughts on DSA, but DSA can work too. Definitely just, get involved with any orgs to, combat this. Any land back initiatives, just to kind of combat the capitalist nonsense going on. Because if we don't do it, then we'll just kind of die. Yeah. Did you have any suggestions, Becca, before we close out?
One book that I've read some of, but I need to read again just because it's really, really good, is called Endless Holocausts, Mass Death in the History of the United States Empire. I used some of those points to kind of figure out my points for this episode. And the author's David Michael Smith. Very, very good. And I think the title just alone should tell you how much it aligns with kind of what we've talked about today. It's like really, like, because, and I think Holocaust is the only word that gets people to like really pay attention, I think, to things, because that's the most terrible thing anyone's gone through, who is white, I guess. I saw this video that was saying, like, no, literally, it was saying like, the Holocaust is seen as this really, really horrific thing because it happened to white people, because it's like people of color have been experiencing that for as long as time has existed, basically. So, using that, and the author uses that term like when he's talking about like what specifically like the genocide of Native Americans. He calls it the Indigenous Peoples Holocaust, and then the African American Holocaust. And I think it really helps draw attention to just for white folks anyway, that perspective of, oh man, this was a really horrific thing that happened. So yeah, that's definitely a good book that I would recommend. But I think you kind of touched on everything. All the resources I would recommend. I love Alex O'Connor and Genetically Modified Skeptic. And Genetically Modified Skeptic, his wife also has a YouTube channel. And gosh, her name is right on the tip of my tongue, but she talks about a lot of stuff that he does, but it's the Antibot. That's what it is. She kind of talks about similar things related to, and those three, Alex Connor, etc., talk more about related things. But that's something that we touch on too. So we always like to shout them out because they're great resources if you need any resources on like more educated and more really in-depth looks at religion. So
All right. Well, with that being said, I think we'll close out for today. We thank you all for tuning in, and if you listen to the entire thing, thank you so much.
yes.
If you're watching, because it's pretty long, and most of our stuff will be long. Heads up. If you are on the YouTube side, please feel free to like and subscribe. We would greatly appreciate it. And if you are on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or Spotify, please feel free to go ahead and save the podcast and click the bell so you get notifications. We should be dropping these every bi-weekly on Monday morning, so you guys can enjoy those for the week. Without further ado, that should be it for us, and we will see you all on the next one.
Bye. See ya.